Oh, so good. Like, can you imagine we got to go there? That was beautiful. Great time. Now, we're starting a new series on leading up to Easter. So we remember the death of Jesus on the cross and his resurrection 3 days later. So we have a series called People of the Cross and then People of the Resurrection. So people who, watched on, were involved in that situation. Today we're looking at a section. One of the people is Simon, who was walking along and they made him carry the cross of Jesus as he was going to Golgotha. And so we have a short clip. Now, these themes it is tense. These are hard topics, thinking about Jesus' sacrifice and death when he died to show his love and save. And so as we watch this little clip, it helps us to get thinking. Let's have a look.
Can you imagine walking into a crowded city, expecting nothing more than to fulfill a religious duty, only to be thrust into the center of the most pivotal event in history? What would you do if, in a single moment, you were asked to shoulder the burden of a condemned man, a man whose destiny would alter the course of the world forever? For Simon of Cyrene, this was no hypothetical question. An ordinary pilgrimage became an extraordinary calling, as he carried the cross of Jesus Christ and stepped into a story of redemption that still echoes today.
All right. Thanks, Paula. Hi, everybody. My name is Kim, and I'm honored to do the Bible reading today, which comes from Luke 23, verses 26 to 31. And it says, "As they led Jesus away, a man named Simon, who was from Cyrene, happened to be coming in from the countryside. The soldiers seized him and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large crowd trailed behind, including many grief-stricken women. But Jesus turned and said to them, 'Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are coming when they will say, fortunate indeed are the women who are childless, the wombs that have not borne a child, and the breasts that have never nursed. People will bring the mountains, fall on us, and plead with the hills, bury us. For if these things are done when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?'"
Hi everyone, I'm Peter, and we were reminded last night that the only way to life is through relationship with Jesus. And so we'll be talking a lot about Jesus these next few weeks, and we're talking about the people who knew Jesus and who knew him at a really important time, the people who met him at the cross and the people who met him when he rose from the dead, people who met him in the resurrection. And tonight we start with this Simon guy. And the interesting thing about Simon is that he wasn't from Jerusalem. He was from Cyrene, which is a place in Libya, if you know where Libya is, the other side of Egypt. So isn't it lovely that right at the beginning of this story, God chose someone from another nation to be part of Jesus' journey to the cross? It's very important and very significant because what Jesus did on the cross is for people from every nation. So let's hear it for Simon. Cheers for Simon. Then the next group of people we met is actually this bunch of ladies, and it's a bit of a long story, but they're going along and have you ever been to a funeral where people, they cry out and loudly, they're wailing, and that it's part of grief. They're very sad. And these people, they were following Jesus and they were doing that. And Jesus, he said to them, "Do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and weep for your children." And Jesus knew that actually this was going to be a hard time for those vulnerable women, for their children, in fact, for a world without Jesus. It's tough. And people, they are very vulnerable. But we'll move on. We're going to move on 2 slides to the soldiers. And we'll slow down a little bit now and we'll think about what is happening. As the soldiers led Jesus out, they also took 2 criminals and they put them on the cross either side of Jesus. We see in verse 32, when they came to the place called the Skull, that's the name of the hill, they nailed him to the cross. The criminals were also crucified, one on the right, one on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing." And the soldiers gambled for his clothes using dice. How do you feel about that? It's upsetting, isn't it? They brought Jesus to a place of death. I don't really like to think very much about having nails hammered through my arm and into a piece of wood, but they did that to Jesus. And they took his clothes off in order to shame him. And they were not sad about doing this. They were so close to Jesus, but they just didn't care. In fact, they just wanted his clothes, and they just played a silly game of dice. Right there, when the biggest thing in the world is happening right beside them, and they're playing dice. So these soldiers, they represent brutality, hardness of heart, violence. And Jesus says, "Forgive them." Then we go on to the next slide. And we come to some mockers. People who are making fun. People who are looking down to Jesus. The crowd watched. Now think about that. What sort of crowd gathers to watch a man killed? And the leaders, they scoffed. "He saved others. Let him save himself if he really is God's Messiah, the chosen one." And they mocked him by offering a drink of sour wine, bad wine. They called out to him, "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." And a sign was fastened above him with these words, "This is the King of the Jews." And all of this is nasty. What kind of people are entertained by death? You know, maybe in some of the countries that are represented, we actually do. Maybe in some countries, people still gather together to watch people fight to the death. Actually, you know, in Australia and many other countries, we have reality TV. And we see many acts of cruelty on our TV. There's a show called "I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here." And what they did, they put a hole in the ground and they put a lady in there with snakes all over her. And she was a lady with not good mental health. And then they had cameras that could see in the dark. And all of Australia watched this poor woman as she just had to lie there in this dark hole with snakes crawling over her and no light. Do you think we're much better in Australia? Why are we entertained by that? The Jewish leaders wanted to insult Jesus. Actually, they were the ones that decided to kill Jesus. And this nasty sign that was put up is a nasty joke about the king of the Jewish people. The Jewish people were ruled by the Romans, and the Romans put this sign up. "If this is your king, you Jews, then we just judged your king, we whipped your king, we stripped your king naked, and we killed him next to some criminals." They're sending a very nasty message, aren't they? And I feel upset, right? I feel a lot of things. I feel a bit of anger about that. I feel a deep sadness about that. How could they treat anybody like that? How could they treat the Son of God like that? But does God want us to get angry? Does God want us to be super sad? We Christians, we call this day Good Friday because God brought good out of this really sad situation. And you know, was Jesus angry? Was he crying? He looked at these enemies with love and said, forgive them. All through this violence, all through this abuse, Jesus was steadfastly kind and loving. He didn't open his mouth to answer evil with evil. The truth shone through, and we eventually found out that Jesus was indeed God's chosen king. And more than that, he's the King of heaven and earth. But that is more about Sunday and the resurrection. So I'm going to be patient. So we have lots of different people who are there, right? We have Simon, who represents the nations. We have the women who are so vulnerable. We have the soldiers who are all about violence. We have the mockers who are all about shame. But you know who else was there? God was there. God was there. By this time, it was about noon, the middle of the day, and darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. The light from the sun was gone, and suddenly the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn down the middle. Then Jesus shouted, "Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands." And with these words, he breathed his last. Yes, God was there. God sent the darkness. And what a way to acknowledge the sin of mankind against his Son. What a way to show that a world without Jesus is a very dark and sad place indeed. Yes, God was there. And because God was there, we actually have hope that there is something more to this story. This is not the end for Jesus. And so after the darkness, we saw a couple of interesting things happening. The big curtain of the temple up on the hill is torn because God rejected his temple. He rejected all of those Jewish leaders who had betrayed Jesus. God was going to go out into the nations so that people could know him through putting faith in Jesus in the future. And Jesus cried out, "I trust my spirit into your hands." And he died, and the Father is there. The Father receives his Son. The body dies, but the spirit or the soul goes to God the Father. And you know something very special is going to happen on the Sunday after this Friday. Now, I want to tell you about that. I so want to tell you about that, but I'm going to wait. And we're going to make you wait for 2 more weeks to talk about that at church, right? But Easter will be really close and we're going to have parties. But there's one more group of people I want to tell you about who were there at the cross that day. It's people I call the watchers, only just because they were watching what was happening and they were thinking. And one of them was a centurion, a Roman soldier in charge of many soldiers. When the Roman soldier overseeing the execution saw what had happened, he worshipped God. What an amazing response, right? This amazing thing has happened. The sun's gone dark for 3 hours, right? And Jesus has trusted his spirit to the Father, and this guy looks at all of that and he puts the jigsaw puzzle together and he says, this man was someone special. And he worships God. He says, surely this man was innocent. And so again, here we have not a Jewish person, right? Not from the community of faith. We have a person from outside, from the nations, recognizing that Jesus was God's son, that something special was happening here. And when all the crowd came to see, they saw what happened. They went home in deep sorrow, right? They didn't get it. They didn't understand. But Jesus' friends, including the women who followed him all the way from Galilee, where Jesus grew up, they stood at a distance watching. Why do you watch? If you're a mum or a dad and you stand at the school gate, you're watching to see your little kid come out of the gate, right? To grab them and give them a big hug and take them home. We watch for something really exciting. You might watch the whales are starting to come up the coast, right? The whales are swimming up past the coast here. We watch to see something wonderful. And all of Jesus' friends, they were waiting. This story is not over. God is present. There's more to come. And so this is the first week where we talk about some of the different people who were witnesses, who were there at the cross. Simon, the man representing the nations, the women who were so vulnerable, the soldiers who were so violent, the mockers who were all about shame and self-interest. God, because there is hope. And the watchers, because they are thinking and they are learning and they are seeing Jesus and coming to know Jesus. And they're the ones who will find life. They're the ones who will find forgiveness and the love of God and the community of faith. So praise God for this incredible moment. The saddest day, but can I say the goodest day? That's not an English word. The goodest, the best day until Sunday, which is even better. So praise God. Be excited. Know Jesus as much as you can. Get all this information, put the picture together and join us in worshipping God.